Hi, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. Now, it's important to understand the tactics of property investment, how to get the best deal, understanding mortgages, and we've covered that in detail. But it's also just as important, if not more important, to understand the mega trends that are taking place. Because you can have your tactics right, but if you don't understand the trends that are happening around you, you could be wiped out. So in this episode, we're going to run through the biggest property trends that are happening right now so you can put yourself in the strongest position.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning property investors come to be informed and inspired. Yes, this week we're going to be looking at some of the trends that could be emerging as a result of the thoroughly bizarre 2020 we've had so far, and talking about how they might affect property investment in the future. And going into this episode, we don't necessarily know what we think about some of these, so it'll be interesting to see where the conversation takes us. And make sure you stick around to the end, because in Hub Extra, we've got a resource that will blow your mind and may even turn out to be useful.
So with so many negative news stories, so many mixed messages, this week, on the surface at least, seems like a very positive message for the property market. And the headline reads, asking prices reach 4-year high, according to Rightmove.
Which is mad, isn't it? That's kind of not at all what was meant to be happening right now. But yeah, since March, prices have grown by 2.4%, now and reaching an average of 320,000 or so. 2.4% increase since March is big, especially given that the market was meant to be struggling right now. What's behind that? Well, stamp duty, partially at least. In fact, the market was doing pretty well. Sellers were feeling optimistic even before the stamp duty holiday was announced, but that is certainly going to be helping. Sellers perhaps feeling confident because they realise that buyers have now got a little bit more money in their pocket because they're not going to have that bill to pay, therefore feeling they can nudge those asking prices up a bit.
The optimism isn't evenly shared though. In Scotland, they've seen the biggest rises with a 4.5% increase since March. That's huge. And in Yorkshire, they've seen a 4.1% rise. In London, they have seen a rise, but it's just been 0.5%. But 0.5% of London property prices is a chunky number anyway. And as you touched on, Rob, speaking to agents across the UK right now, there is definitely a sense of optimism. You know, developers too, sales directors feeling very good about their position right now. We'll have to see how long this momentum goes on for. But it's interesting, I've seen this play out firsthand as well. I've got a friend who was selling up their home and their chain collapsed. And obviously they felt quite bad and quite negative at the time. It was quite a long and complex chain, so it wasn't a surprise that it fell over. But they needed to move quickly because they're emigrating, and they put their property back on the market, quite keen to get it sold. And not only did they sell it again straight away within a couple of weeks, but they actually sold it to a chain-free buyer for £20,000 more, which is quite crazy, really. You know, a motivated seller gets £20,000 more, but that's the market we're in right now. So as property investors, we're having to work a little bit harder possibly than we were a month or two ago. Because when there's confidence, you've got to fight harder for a deal. So good news in one sense, because property prices are going up. But also, on the other hand, if you haven't got into a deal yet, more challenging because it seems vendors, at least for the moment, are expecting more for their properties.
I think it's fair to say that 2020 hasn't panned out in quite the way we were expecting it to. The world has changed this year in ways that no one had seen coming. But what's the longer term effect of these changes going to be? How is the world going to be different as a result of having gone through the coronavirus pandemic? That's what we're going to be talking about in this episode as it relates to property. We're going to look at some potential property mega trends, ways in which the way we live, therefore the way in which we invest in property, could change over the long term with coronavirus as the trigger. And Rob, we were talking before we started recording, and you were saying that there's actually a trend that's probably not a long-term trend, but something that you're already seeing play out now, even though we're still in the midst of this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And depending on your circumstances and how COVID's affected you, it might be one that you can relate to quite quickly or something that you've possibly witnessed. I think a short-term trend we can see from COVID related to property is the amount of refurbs that are going on, not for investment, but for people's own personal enjoyment, because we've all been in our homes a lot more. And while we're in our homes, we're kind of looking around and spotting jobs and opportunities and potential and how we can make our homes a bit nicer and so on. And because of that, a lot of people have been acting on it. And there's a lot of work going on right now where people are going, right, you know what, I'll put that new bathroom in, or I'll get that driveway done, or whatever else. This is not for everyone. There are many people who've had it hard through COVID, but it's not the same for everyone. While some have had it really tough, others actually haven't had it as bad.
Well, this is it. For people who are not going to lose their jobs as a result of this, I think the majority of them are going to end up in a better financial situation. Because either you've been working the whole way through, earning your normal salary, but spending less. You're not spending on your commute. You're not spending on your dry cleaning and your lunches and everything else. And you're not going out and you're not going on holiday. You're not socialising. So you're going to come out way ahead. And even if you've been furloughed on 80% of your salary, you're still probably going to come out ahead because your spending's fallen so much. So it's easy to look at all the people who might lose their jobs and think about the effect of that. But there's also a real effect from the people who've kept their jobs and are going to be coming out of this in a stronger financial position, and have also just spent a few months at home noticing things in their home, becoming increasingly dissatisfied with things that they weren't that bothered about before. So it seems likely that some of that money that's been saved is going to be invested back into improving their homes.
So that's the first trend that we witnessed because of COVID. But this episode's about mega trends. What could potentially happen, not just now, but over the long term? Will things change? There's been a bit of discussion in the papers on some of these points, and some of them are things that we're just interested in, so we're going to have a bit of a chat around it. And the first on our list, and probably the one that's had the most debate and the most attention, is the reversal of city centre living. A lot of people have reported that searches are up for countryside locations on Rightmove and Zoopla, and potentially demand for city centre living is going to reverse, and people are going to start moving back out of cities again. Rob, of all the points that we've got in the episode, this is the one that we have briefly discussed before. And I think it's fair to say that we're not completely convinced.
No, the logic of it makes total sense. So in the short term, many of the benefits of living in cities went away. A large part of the reason to be in a city is entertainment. Another reason is to be close to work, and we'll talk about home working later on. But also, if you're worried about this kind of thing happening again, you want to be further away from people. You don't want to be at that kind of risk. You don't want to be cooped up somewhere small when you could be living somewhere further out that's bigger. So all the arguments that were for people congregating in cities, you could make an argument for how those have been completely turned on the head. And now the opposite applies. I'm not buying it though. And the reason for that is all those factors that I just mentioned. I think all of them are somewhat temporary. Some of them might linger around, so you might get people working from home more, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But a lot of those other things, like the fear of being around other people and benefits of the entertainment going away, they are temporary. And the move towards city centre living was such a powerful trend. And we've dedicated a couple of episodes to it in the past. I don't see that completely reversing course.
No, I agree. What we could see, at least in the short term, is that where people live in and around city centres could change. And whether this goes on to be a long-term mega trend, we'll see. But I think, like refurbishments, in the short term, and this could be a few years, where people locate themselves within a city could change. So, for example, if we take London, it's been documented that search terms are down for places like Oxford Circus, Hackney, more built-up areas. And searches are up for places like Twickenham and Richmond and Barnet, places that are still in London and a lot greener and often that little bit further out, but transport links are still really good, that you can probably get into London as quickly as you can get across it, so you're not at a loss there. Will we see property prices increase in these areas? Well, they've always done quite strong anyway, because of the fact that they have all this greenery and space, and in London that is at a premium. But will it exaggerate further? It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. It also wouldn't surprise me that places just outside London but have really strong train links into London could benefit as well. So people automatically think of Crossrail too, but there are numerous other train lines that run in and out of the capital that allow you to get into London, in some cases more quickly than it takes you to get across London. Those areas could potentially do well also. And those areas just outside the city, you still get to benefit from the city itself and a lot of the services and features that you have within that city because they're close enough to it. So things like Uber, same-day delivery of Amazon, all the things that are important to us these days exist there as well. So long-term trend of city centre living going away and decreasing, can't see it happening. Where people decide to live in and around the city in the short term, possibly a change. It'd be interesting to watch that one.
Okay, what about this one? So where people live in and around a city, you could see that changing. What about the type of property that people want to live in within those locations? So again, there's been a lot documented around people searching specifically for properties with gardens. That's something that's important to people now in a way that it wasn't a few months ago. And generally people wanting more space, which is tied into location, of course, and it being easier to have more space outside the city centre, but it's not quite the same thing. So what do you think of that kind of sub point about people suddenly not being satisfied with the amount of space they've got and wanting outdoor space as part of that as well?
Again, there's a lot of logic for this to be the case. And I think in the short term, a bit like where people live within city centres, and I think it's got the potential to be a short-term trend. Will it go on to be a long-term trend? It's interesting. It depends on what's built in the future. I think possibly a hybrid of this will be that if people are living in apartment blocks, they'll want communal gardens or spaces like that they can escape to. I'm not convinced it's going to be a super strong long-term trend because people's memories and experiences do fade over time and do become less important. The present always feels the most extreme. In the future, it won't feel as extreme what we've lived through. So short term, yes. Longer term, I can see some of it incorporated, but maybe it's not demanded. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It makes obvious sense as a short-term thing, and there's a natural desire to extrapolate that way off into the future. But like you said, I don't think that's necessarily how it works. And I think you've also got to be careful about looking at what people are searching for right now and assuming that that's what people are actually going to do. I can't remember if we've said this on the podcast before or if we were just talking about it, but people are on Rightmove kind of looking at their options all the time. It's almost a national pastime. We do it. So at a time like we've had over the last few months, it's very natural to go on there and go, oh, it'd be really nice to have a garden now. What could I get? Everyone's going to be doing that, but that doesn't mean that everyone's going to follow through with it. So when you look at those kind of leading indicators of people's behaviour, I think it's very easy to get an exaggerated impression of the ultimate behaviour that's going to result from that.
So sticking on the subject of city centre living, the other trend that could come about is that we become less London-centric as time goes on. So the UK is heavily dependent on London. And yes, that is the UK. Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the north of England. We may not like it, but the economy is driven by London, and the data backs that up. But will that change? Well, it could be debated, Rob, that this was a trend, or at least an intention, that existed before lockdown happened. So will things now accelerate, or actually that trend disappear? What are your thoughts?
I think this is going to continue and possibly accelerate because, like you said, this was a trend that was in place before COVID. There's been lots of reports about people moving out of London. I don't know if the population of London has shrunk, but I saw somewhere that if you put aside immigration into the country, then within the UK, there are more outflows than inflows. And a lot of that, of course, is people moving out to the suburbs, but then there's also lots of people moving further afield into the Midlands or even the North because they recognise that there's so much value and in many ways a better lifestyle up there. When I say that I think that's going to continue, I don't think that's anything to do with COVID itself. London is actually surprisingly green. There's loads of open spaces, loads of parks. There are other UK cities that are smaller, but actually significantly more urban in the way that you'd think about it. But you've got the trend that was already there. No reason for that to reverse. You add on to that some people at the margins wanting to have more space and have a garden, and they can't afford that in London. And you add some home working onto that. And even if those last couple of factors turn out not to be big ones, they're still pushing in the direction of the trend that was there before. So it's not like I think London's going to be empty in a few years' time, but I do think the data will show that people are moving out of London. The UK is going to become gradually less London-centric. And I think for the whole country, that's a really good thing.
Yeah, I agree, Rob. And the momentum is being pushed along as well. It's not a natural one. There's a lot of political incentives to drive this forward. So the Conservative government are in power right now, and they are so because they've won more votes up north. So a lot of the things they're announcing, the infrastructure projects, the investment, a lot of it now is coming into the north. It's still continuing in London, but it always has been in London. But now they're bringing that investment, rightly so, into the north. And that's not because they suddenly now love northerners. They love votes, wherever you are. And if votes exist in the north, they will invest in the north. But the thing is, if the Tory government was to ever lose power and Labour was to come in, they can't certainly do any less than what the Conservatives were doing. And if anything, will possibly do more because they have to be seen to be doing more. So whatever way you look at this, there's that drive, there's that push to make this happen. Another thing that's happening is a lot of these places are having more autonomy on how they run their affairs, how they spend their money, how they allocate resources. And again, that being done on a local level is only going to help and improve things. So this trend absolutely was happening before, but as you said, Rob, and I completely agree with, can only be accelerated by what's happened.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. And this is one that we've hinted at a couple of times in what we've already talked about. More home working. So are we going to see a lot more people working from home now? Is this something people are going to want to do? Is this something that companies are going to want their employees to do because it saves them money on offices? And if that is the case, are we going to see changes to how homes are built and the features that are going to be in them? You go first on this one, because I don't actually know what I think about this.
I think we can definitely see things happening, at least the headlines, that businesses or some businesses are more open to or even welcoming of home working. So Twitter, as an example, has said that you don't have to go back to the office ever again. You know, that's a big company and a company that generates headlines. So judging by the headlines of a few tech companies, then yes, you can see that playing out. But what's really interesting is we were having a conversation with somebody recently, Rob, and they said to us, and I think they absolutely nailed it, is that we're all in the home working honeymoon period at the moment. We all love it at the moment because it's new. It's shaking things up, it's different, it's exciting, you know, we're loving the benefits that it brings. But at some point, the home working honeymoon will end, and people will miss, if they're not already, being social, the benefits that offices can bring, the creativity sparks that are generated by being in person. So for me, I can see this being a micro trend rather than a mega trend. Will there be possibly a bit more home working? Well, yes, but I think that was going to be the case anyway. I think businesses would have got there eventually. Technology is improving, and there are benefits to offering some level of flexibility. But I don't think this is a strong trend where within 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years' time, the majority of businesses will have the majority of people working from home for the majority of the time. I just don't see that happening. So for me, this could be a micro trend rather than a mega trend, and we're looking for mega trends here. So before we get into what that means for property and property investors, has that inspired you to come on with some thoughts or opinions on this?
Yeah, I think the home working honeymoon absolutely nails it. Doing it for a few months is very different from doing it forever. People go camping and live in a tent for a week for fun, but you wouldn't want to live in a tent forever, would you? It's a different thing. And also from the employer side, a lot of employers have said that they've been pleasantly surprised by how productivity hasn't changed as a result of people working from home. And I'm sure that's true. Yeah, people waste time at home, but they waste time in the office and get into the office in different ways as well. But productivity is only one part of running an organisation.
Which is true, Rob. But how many people are putting that extra effort in right now because we're in that honeymoon? Because there is, rightly or wrongly, that fear of loss of jobs, and people want to be showing that they are productive and are doing more. But when that fear goes away, does that productivity remain? We can't say, but it could be debated that once people get comfortable again, productivity levels have the potential to drop in line with or even below office working.
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, it's quite possible. And also from an employer's point of view, productivity is only one part of running an organisation, but also the corporate culture is really important. And that's very difficult to maintain when everyone is dispersed. So are you going to see more people working from home in 3 to 5 years' time than they were at the start of 2020? Yes, I think you will. Is it going to be of a magnitude that changes how society is organised? I don't think so. But it is an interesting opportunity to examine the way we work. So the 40-hour work week with everyone turning up at 9 and going home at 5, it's a direct holdover from the Industrial Revolution when you needed to have everyone on the production line at the same time. That doesn't apply anymore. So I think it'll be interesting to see if there's more flexibility introduced into the way people work, and if there are ways of reducing some of the negatives of working in an office rather than from home. But those to me do seem like adjustments rather than something that upends the way society is organised.
Yeah, I agree. We'll see more. We were on this trend already. I think it's been mildly accelerated by what's happened. and more people will be working from home and more flexibility will be offered. I'd be surprised if that's not the case. So as property investors, property developers, should we now all be looking to incorporate a home office? I don't think so. But if you have HMOs, for example, having a space, if you can find it, for some desks within the room or within the communal areas where people can work, that will probably be a plus point. Finding desk space within bedrooms, if you're furnishing, again, a plus point. So rather than a radical overhaul for property investors, I think it's just being thoughtful about what we do and adapting for this trend, which is absolutely a trend, but I don't think we're going to be tagging it as a property megatrend. What could be, though, Rob, is the death of retail. If the death of retail happens, that certainly would be a megatrend. Is it going to happen?
Yeah, I think it is. For me, this falls into the same category of the UK becoming less London-centric. It was something that was happening anyway, that's just being accelerated by what we've gone through this year. More and more people have been doing more and more of their shopping online anyway, because it's more convenient and delivery's got so much better. And now, just about everyone who wasn't doing that before has now been forced to. So there's a whole new massive cohort of people who previously hadn't shopped online or had barely done it, who will now be getting used to it and will enjoy the benefits of it. I've seen this in my own family. My mum never did any grocery shopping online before. Now she's had to figure out how to do that. And will she stop doing that when everything goes back to normal? I don't think so. I'm not saying there will be no more shops, because you've still got businesses based around services and experiences. And there are some kinds of retail that are more experience-based. But if you look at the share price of companies that are exposed to retail and to shopping centres, they have absolutely been hammered over the last few months. And I'm not sure if they're going to come back.
It's really interesting. This was the point on our agenda that I didn't have a strong view on. And so it's really interesting to hear your views and the fact that they're so strong. And you've started to convince me. I don't necessarily know if I'd call it the death of retail, but the massive weakening of retail. And you've touched on it there, but I can definitely see high streets needing to adapt and change and it being more about experiences. Shopping can be an experience. Apple have demonstrated that. You know, their stores have done so well because people go there not just to buy their iPhones, but go there for the experience. And I think if retail companies want to survive, they'll have to offer experiences. Going in just to buy clothes, trying them on, and then walking out. Of course, there are going to be people who want to do that, and that isn't going to change. But that's only a small proportion of people. People like clothes shopping. But most people are probably quite content with getting their clothes at home, trying them on at home, deciding what they like, what they don't like, and sending it back. There's not enough of those people to keep the whole high street up and running. And other things come into the high street. We already start to see this trend, but again, I think it'll accelerate. It's like the crazy golf experiences, trampolining, all these fun things. People want experiences more now. Shopping isn't a big enough experience for people. And I think those clothing stores that survive will need to create experiences, or I do think it'll be the death of them. So yes, Rob, I think you got me on board. I'm with you. I think it will dramatically change, or it needs to dramatically change to survive. Because if it doesn't, then actually, you know what? I'm coming full circle here. I think you could be right. If it doesn't adapt, it will die.
Yeah, and what you said about repurposing, I think, is really interesting, because I do believe that city centres are important, high streets are important, as somewhere that gives character to an area and a place for people to meet and interact. So what I would hope would happen is that our high streets are brought back to life by people coming in and using them for these more experiential type activities and cafes and restaurants and all those kinds of things that you can't replicate online. And also maybe have some buildings turned from commercial into residential, so you've got more of a mix and people living there as well. That could be a really positive thing. I think it's out of town retail that it's hard to see a path back for, and the big shopping centres as well. From a property investment point of view, there's all that to think about, but there's also a potential benefit to locations that are exposed to the upside of more shopping going online. So on the podcast before, we've tipped Doncaster as an investment location because it's so well connected. Lots of companies want to have their distribution centres there. And companies like Amazon are opening up more and more of these distribution centres across the country because people want delivery quickly. So the distribution points need to be close to where people live. So it's easy to see who the losers are going to be from this trend, but there are winners as well.
There are, and I completely, again, agree with your out-of-town retail point, Rob. But to give some optimism to people who want it to survive, I think it can survive, again, through experience. An example of something that probably will survive and possibly thrive are places like Vista Village or Cheshire Oaks, where you go shopping, but it's not just the shops, it's the whole experience of being there. It feels different, it feels nice. It's not just a retail park with a massive car park and you kind of go in your shops and go home. It feels like a day out, an experience. So if these out-of-town retail venues can adapt again and make it just as much, if not more, about the experience, then they might survive. But they absolutely do need to adapt. Next on our list is UK holidays, or more UK holidays as a trend. And obviously those who operate with holiday lets would benefit from this. So, Rob, in the short term, I think, without question, I don't think anyone's going to give us any medals for saying that there's going to be a huge increase in the short term in UK holidays. Will that continue?
This is another one of those that I'm less sure about. My default position that's come through in most of these is that nothing ever changes as much as you think it will. There's always an event and you go, oh, this changes everything. And then it kind of doesn't. It changes things a bit, but not that much. And so my default position is to think that UK holidays is going to be the same thing. Of course, it's going to happen in the short term. But then when people get more relaxed about flying again, everything's going to go back to normal. And I think it's easy to see why that would be the case. It's so relatively inexpensive to go to many places abroad, and the weather is more reliable, the weather's better, and it's different. So people are still going to want to do that. It's possible, though, that because so many more people are going to be holidaying in the UK over the next year, that they realise that that's actually a really positive experience. It's much less hassle than going abroad. There are loads of wonderful destinations in the UK, and maybe the weather turns out not to be as bad as they feared. So it's certainly possible that this short-term trend translates into a longer-term one to some degree. If you've got a strong view on this, Rob, I'm here to be convinced, but otherwise I'm going to default to not.
I don't think it'll be a mega trend. But I am more sold on the idea than you are about this having a bit more of a surge beyond just the immediate short term. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a mini renaissance with the love of the UK and people wanting to spend more time here and finding in those different areas. Something that you kind of touched on a little bit. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this run for a decade. Will it change eventually? Yes, I think it will. Because for all those reasons you've mentioned, the sun being a big part of it, and other reasons that people will continue to travel. So I think UK holiday lets could do very well in the medium term. I don't mean this is a short-term trend. So it's not a minor trend, it's not a mega trend, it's a moderate trend for me. Time will tell. I hope I'm right, because I think those areas could do with a boost. But I also hope it's not a mega trend because I think travel is healthy.
Yeah, from a property investment point of view, you could definitely say that if you're into holiday lets, it's going to be positive to some degree. It's not going to be worse. It is going to be better. You can't say by how much or for how long. But I can see more investors getting interested in doing holiday lets, attracted by the logic that there's going to be more demand, and I can see that working out well. There's a different type of property investment, though, that potentially you could see an argument for not doing so well. So could we see the death of the HMO, or have we at least seen peak HMO? Are people going to be less keen on living in close proximity with people who are not members of their family than they were before? When you combine that with things we've talked about already, like moving out of cities and more home working, is there going to be less need for people to live together because there's going to be more willingness to move out to less expensive areas where you could have a one-bedroom flat to yourself rather than a room in a shared house because you need to be in London near the office? You can see the argument for it, but is it going to happen, Rob?
I'm not convinced. For those in HMOs, if you are in a high-demand area, I believe that area will continue to be high demand. Most people don't choose to be in a HMO. If you said to most people in a HMO, right, I know that room's nice, but do you want to swap it for the 2-bed flat to yourself? I think the high proportion of them would say yes. Of course, some people like the social aspect to it, but most people are living in HMOs in cities like London because of economic reasons, not for reasons of choice. So they could move further out. But I think a lot of people who come to London initially will still want to live in HMOs because it's easier. They don't know about the areas on the outskirts of London. And also, they've moved for a reason. They want to be in the thick of it, at least for a while. So I think HMOs are here to stay. And simply because of the economic reasons behind it, they're needed. And for most people, I don't believe it's a choice thing. Now, the only exception to my relatively strong views on this are areas that might not be as strong as London and the economic factors aren't as present. So, for example, places like Milton Keynes, Rugby, Doncaster, areas that have seen a lot of HMOs popping up because of all the infrastructure and the warehouses based in those areas. Could there be a decline there? Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if there was a decline. It really wouldn't. But for some areas, and London being one of them, Cambridge, Oxford, I can't see how it can't continue because of the way prices are.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly don't think we're seeing the death of the HMO. I do think, though, that we might have reached peak HMO and we're going to start coming down the other side to some extent now. And that's a really easy statement to make because I don't think there's any stats on this, so it's going to be hard to prove me wrong. But if the UK is going to be becoming less London-centric, then that's fewer people moving down to London from wherever they lived or wherever they studied and needing to share. Student accommodation used to be pretty much exclusively HMOs, but now you're seeing more and more purpose-built accommodation. But also HMOs were, for a while, a trendy investment. Everyone was doing HMOs. And so what you were saying about areas there, Rob, I think some HMOs have been created in areas that can't really support them. So I do think we've had the peak, but I don't think there's going to be a significant decline. I don't think there's going to be anything that you'd really notice because, Rob, of that affordability point that you made. That's the absolute key to this, and that's not really going to change.
But things do change, and that's the point of this episode. If we just keep our current strategies and only stick to them, at some point, they're going to become less effective and possibly, in some cases, redundant. For example, if you invest in clothing retail stores in the UK, and that's where you put your money right now, you're probably going to be in a bit of trouble. So this episode's been a lot about big picture trends and concepts, but it's important to have awareness of these because it's so easy to get stuck in our day-to-day and think, right, okay, tenants doing this, need to arrange that. All right, okay, new opportunity to buy this property. And yes, you absolutely have to do that. But it's also important to stop every now and again and think about the bigger picture, assess your strategy. And if it is working, great, crack on, double down, do more. But if it is starting to be not as effective as it once was, could it be a trend that's taking place that's beyond your control unless you adapt? So hopefully this podcast is giving you a jolt, a nudge to go, you know what, here's some mega trends, some moderate trends and some minor trends as it's turned out that you need to be aware of. But practice this by yourself. Take the time every now and again to reassess your strategy and what's happening in the wider market and economy just to make sure that you're on the right path. And if you do that, I'm sure you will be.
One trend that's only been gathering pace over the last few years and which we very much hope will continue is letting us know about the success that you're having in property. We love hearing your success stories, whether they're big or small, and it's really easy to let us know. We're on all the socials at Property Hub UK, or you can pop a note on the Property Hub forum at propertyhub.net/forum. That's what Ashrita has done. She says lots of nice things about our books and the podcast, and then says, I put together a 10-year business plan and bought my first buy-to-let property in Peterborough in late 2016. It wasn't the perfect property, but I learned so much from that experience, I haven't looked back since. I now own 6 properties in the UK, Leeds, Liverpool, London and Peterborough, including a semi-commercial apartment building, 1 property in San Francisco, and plan to continue expanding my profile in the UK and US. Wow, that is some pretty phenomenal progress in less than 4 years. Well done, and thanks for letting us know about it.
That's quite a business plan. Congratulations. Super impressive. Now, we love giving you extra and Hub Extra and giving you a resource that you can take advantage of every single week. And we extend that even further with the Hub Extra email that goes out to all Property Hub members each and every Friday. And what do you do to become a member, I hear you ask? Well, it's easy. It's just signing up on the website. It's absolutely free. And you can get that email and take advantage of all the free courses that are on there too. I know, great deal, right? But if you think that's great, wait until you hear about this week's resource. Now, it's not a new gadget. It's not a new app even. It's an app that's been out a while. But Rob and I have both recently got quite enthusiastic about it at the same time. And that app is Google Photos. So before I tell you why we got excited about this app, let me quickly tell you what it is. It's basically storage for your photos. So you take a photo and it stores in Google Photos and it's saved in the cloud and it costs a minimal amount every month and they're all backed up. That's great. And there are other services like that. But Google does a few things that just makes it really, really impressive. The first of which I took advantage of just recently. Now, I've not been driving as much recently for obvious reasons, but I was at a car park recently and I had to type my reg in, and I forgot my reg. I could remember half of it, but I was having doubts on the rest. And the car park was massive, and the car was miles away. But then I remembered that someone had told me that the search was phenomenal on Google Photos. And I also remembered that I'd previously taken a photo of my registration, but it was some time ago, so scrolling through all the hundreds, if not thousands of photos would have taken a little bit of time as well and would have been quicker walking. But as I could remember half the registration, I started to type it in the search bar. And yes, it popped up straight away because Google Photos searches within your photos. And that includes any sort of text. So if you've taken pictures of newspaper articles and you're trying to find it, blogs, whatever else, the search is fantastic. But Rob, you've taught me something else today. And I'm like, wow, okay, this app is bonkers value for money.
Yeah, I've been using Google Photos for years just for storage. Until we started talking about it earlier, I didn't properly realize this feature actually existed. It's called Google Lens. And what it does is use computer vision to analyze the objects in your photos and extract information about them. So the first time I noticed this is I took a photo of some flowers just because they look nice. But then if I use Google Lens, based on that picture, it tells me exactly what type of flower it is, which is kind of mad that it can do that.
Just been playing around with it. I've got a photo of the London skyline right now, and I've used Google Lens, and it's telling me the name of all the buildings, which it's incredible that it can do that. It's not just picked out the obvious ones, it's all of them. This is unreal.
Yeah, I've just been doing it as well. But as well as being entertaining, it could actually be useful. It's useful for identifying buildings and landmarks you wouldn't otherwise have known. It could also be useful because if you've got objects like chairs or beds and things like that, it can identify those as well. And presumably they make some money if you end up clicking through and buying something. So it tries to direct you towards where these are on sale. So I've got a picture I took here of a chair, and it's nailed exactly which type of chair this is, and it's linked me to a couple of websites where I can buy it. So if you're going around viewing properties and you see something you like and you want to take inspiration from that and put it into a property of your own, you can instantly find out where it came from, which is just mad. Now I know this exists, I'm just not going to stop. I'm just going to keep doing it on everything out of interest, and I'm sure more actual legitimate uses of it will become clear as well.
Yep, that's my day gone. So I think we better wrap up there. Thank you for listening. If you want more, then do check out our socials. You can find us at Property Hub UK. We're very active there. And of course, you've got the Property Hub forum where you can converse with other hubbers and chat about property. Again, free. Take advantage of it. And make sure you take advantage of our YouTube channel. Again, search for Property Hub UK and you will find us so you can subscribe and watch all our lovely videos. We'll be back next Tuesday and Thursday with more podcasts. But until then, everyone, take care. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.